everyone. My name is Lisa Dominici, and I am president of the board of the Rye Youth Council, a local nonprofit that focuses on our children's social and emotional health and well-being. I'm also a Rye resident, and I'm here tonight not only as a friend of Caitlin's, but as someone who has watched in awe at her fierce determination and strength in dealing with her son's mental health illness. And perhaps like many of you in the audience tonight, I have a child, young adult actually, who suffers from major depressive disorder and anxiety. And like many of you, I am searching for a way to help my child live with this disease and will do anything I can to help minimize the impact that it has on her life. So I'm going to thank Caitlin in advance for her courage in sharing her story tonight with all of us and for bringing us together to form bonds, build bridges, and begin to erase the stigma around mental health illness. But first, a few housekeeping points. Please save all of your questions till the end. You all have an index card and pencil on your seat, so feel free to jot down your questions so you don't forget it. And if we don't get a chance to answer all of your questions, Caitlin will reply to them as best she can afterwards, either by email or she will post the questions and the answers on her website. Also, if you haven't yet registered for tonight, if you would like to, please leave your name and email address on your index card, place it in the basket on your way out by the door, and we'll include you on the survey, which will have access to a lot of very relevant information. In an effort to help our ailing environment, we are not providing printed copies of tonight's presentation. However, each of you will receive a survey monkey in your email tomorrow, and from which you can request a copy of the whole entire presentation via email. I also want to point out that although Rye TV are filming today's presentation, thank you, to ensure that others have access to this information, they will only be filming Caitlin and will be careful not to film any of you in the audience. If you know of someone who could benefit from the information tonight, please feel free to let them know that there will be a link on Caitlin's website, and there's also a link on the Rye TV website, which is the ryecity.gov website. So a bit about Caitlin. She was born in the UK. She's half Irish and half Australian, and moved to Rye 8 years ago. She's also lived and worked in Melbourne, Brussels, and Paris. She has gained more than 10 years experience and expertise in different types of family therapy, and has attended over 30 three-day extensive workshops and training sessions, ranging from community resilience to core parenting principles to diagnosis and treatment of mental disorders in children. She has a vested knowledge in the neurology that drives mental illnesses, the various diagnoses, as well as the behavior modification plans that can be implemented. She is highly skilled and experienced in dealing with a range of diagnoses and their symptoms, as well as with the Rye City School District, therapeutic day and boarding schools, therapeutic wilderness programs, educational consultants, educational lawyers, and family therapists. But perhaps most importantly, she has an empathetic, open-minded, and non-judgmental approach, coupled with a determination to destigmatize the views of mental health illnesses within our community. Please welcome Caitlin Fairley.
I'm very delighted and a little overwhelmed that so many of you are here tonight. This is the first time I would have given this presentation, so I'm not quite sure where it's going to lead. But what I do know is having this room full tonight is definitely a step in the right direction. The area of mental health is both complicated and confusing. Not to mention emotional. And everyone in this room will have their own unique views. Just as every child is unique and every case is unique. And tonight, my views might not be your views, but I do hope to share with you some of my journey and therefore some of my learnings as a parent. So before we get started, can I just have a very quick show of hands? Who is here in relation to a preschool or elementary age child? Okay, thank you. Middle school? High school? Young adult? Okay, good range. So I see this presentation as just poking a toe into the seas of the mental health. And almost every slide tonight was originally its own presentation in my head. I was having trouble trying to condense down exactly what I wanted to say, but thankfully for you all, I did. You will be able to go soon. The good news is that I have lots more information and learnings on all of the topics tonight. As Lisa said, we'll have questions at the end. And what's reassuring is that if I don't know the answer to the question, I'm sure someone in this room will. I will tell you my personal story, just to give us some context, but I want tonight to be about everybody in this room. And I want you to feel comfortable, get a glass of wine anytime you like, and I want us to let go of any shame. Tonight this room is like Las Vegas. What happens here stays here. So I believe that transparency is the key. And early on in my journey, it was the one thing that I could do to really make a difference. It was the one thing that I could do where I had some control, and so I decided to use it at every door that I came upon. As a family today, we're just finally beginning to see the wood from the trees in our therapeutic journey, at least for today. But I also know that journey is far from over, and tomorrow may be a different story. But if someone could have given me a little bit of advice or information along the way that could have shortened that journey for me or made it a little bit easier, I would have readily taken it. So my hope tonight is that if some of you can go away with one nugget of useful information that might make your own personal journey a little easier, a little shorter, or a little more informed, then I'll be very happy. So talking is the hardest bit, but it's also the most important, because it means showing up the weaknesses and the cracks. It means admitting you're not perfect. It means admitting your children aren't perfect. It means admitting everybody has faults. And then, of course, on top of that, we're fighting the stigma of mental health. So I truly believe that if you don't talk, you're not opening up potential doors to help and advice and support. And I can safely say that most of the times you do open up, you will be met with sympathy and kindness. If on occasion you're not, and you get judged, well, at least you know that that person has no room in your circle of support. So if from tonight we can create some local support groups, either real or virtual, or perhaps a closed Facebook page where we can talk and share experiences and resources and ideas, good days and bad days, I think it would be an amazing step in the right direction. Because doing it alone is exhausting. Doing it alone is really, really hard. And ultimately, it's not sustainable. And I'm speaking from experience. I might look all right tonight. I've already had the honour of helping a few local families who've approached me. You don't necessarily want to post on Rye Mums. Does anybody know a good psychiatrist? I'm at breaking point. So tonight, I'm hoping to spearhead something. I'm still not quite sure what. But I think we can all help each other, and we can leave behind any judgment and any shame. So, has anybody heard of Twice Exceptional Children? Oh good, lots of you. Well, I know you have. So, Twice Exceptional Children are exceptional because of their intellectual gifts and also because of their special needs. And they're often far, far ahead intellectually, but quite far behind socially and emotionally. And they're very often misunderstood. It's very hard being this kind of kid. Because you're intellectually gifted, you're expected to be productive and successful, but because you have special needs, productivity and success aren't necessarily very easy. Often these children say that school is too difficult or it's too easy, it's never quite right. And because these children are so good at compensating for their special needs, their problems often go undetected for a long time. So we can see from this image here examples of some of the different diagnoses that make up twice exceptional children. In fact, twice exceptional children can be seen as different shades of colours, and these colours can change. Some colours may go well together, some colours may clash, some may blend in and others may stand out. We can also think of these children as rare diamonds. They're often not identified because their roughness and their brilliance mask each other. Anxiety can be particularly prevalent in twice exceptional children and young adults because of their rigid thinking and their strong need for perfectionism and social justice. and this in turn can lead to frustration, low esteem, and social isolation. At my son's present school, where he is in a high school, which is a high school program, all of the teenagers are considered twice exceptional. That's their label, which is so much nicer than autism spectrum disorder level 1 or anxiety and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I just wanted to very quickly look at some quick facts and figures. When I was doing some research for this, the main figure that jumped out at me was the average delay between the onset of symptoms and intervention. And at the moment, that's at an average of 10 years. Now, my son's 15, so that 10 years is about right. It's about how long it's taken us. And, you know, we might ask ourselves, why is it taking this long? I don't know what the answer is, but I assume it's probably because childhood mental health problems, they're very common, they're very damaging, they're very persistent, they're very costly. And it's very, very hard to get diagnoses. So we can see how important early intervention is. Getting help at the first sign really, really is vital, because if it's going to take you 10 years to get any help, that's what we need to do. And the mental health professionals are rightly very conservative. They're dealing with children, but it's very hard to get the help you need. One vital factor in getting help, which I just wanted to bring up, which I think is terribly unfair, is the fact of personal resources. So in my family, we've been lucky, we've been educated enough, and we've just about managed to find the money to get the help we needed. But a lot more people are not that fortunate. And the reality is that we'll all do something, we're all happy to give up whatever we can for our children and make sacrifices, but ultimately, if we don't have the resources, getting help is going to be much harder. Recognised we were in full crisis mode and took us to see a psychiatrist. After a few months and medication tryouts, my son was initially diagnosed with ADHD, possibly a mood disorder, and a tic disorder. However, his mood swings and rages were continuing, and they were so intense and so frequent that at the tender age of just 8 years old, he was diagnosed with early onset bipolar disorder. The diagnosis seemed to fit. Most of the symptoms ticked the list. I was relieved as much as I was devastated. Relieved to have something to work to, something to try and fix, but devastated at the long-term implications. He subsequently got a 504 and an IEP, and the Rye District gave us as much support as they could. But by the end of 3rd grade, they too told us they couldn't accommodate him anymore. So in conjunction with the school, we found a New York state-registered day treatment centre. He was contained at this school, not really progressing, but not spiralling downwards either, for 4 years. And then they too were struggling to accommodate him. Just after his 13th birthday, he spent 10 days in a psychiatric hospital, where he was so drugged up he was hallucinating. We only had one visit to him, and this is the first and last time I've seen my husband cry. I'm sorry for saying that. My son still had no friends and peer relations were clearly an issue to him, as were his constant rages. And so we decided to send him to a therapeutic wilderness program over the summer break. We flew with him to Wisconsin, promising him a gritty outdoor summer camp, omitting saying in black and white just quite how therapeutic it was. We did have to get him there. As we left him there with no clothes or belongings, he looked at us rather helplessly, and I did feel a dramatic Shakespearean dagger in my heart. His first letter, back home, after 2 weeks, said this: "Dear Mum and Dad, you told me this was a summer camp, but it is a therapy program. It is worse than Four Winds, and I don't need to be here. Did you know it was a therapy program and lied to me? If you thought this was a summer camp, please come and pick me up. This is so not the right environment at all. Please reply to all the questions. I love you so, so much, miss you, and want to please come home. We do therapy things all day long, and I cry myself to sleep every night." After receiving that letter, We didn't see or talk to him for 93 days. But when we finally did see him 93 days later, he was 50 pounds lighter and appeared 5 years wiser. He was calm and insightful, and we were delighted at his progress. We had thought that he would just come back home, back to his day treatment school in New York. However, he told us that he needed to practice what he'd learned at Wilderness, and that he needed to go to a therapeutic boarding school. So we had 2 weeks to find him a new placement, a therapeutic boarding school. We didn't even know these existed in America, so we found an educational consultant, and 2 weeks later we picked up our son from Wisconsin, and we dropped him off at a school in Idaho. This school served 40 middle school aged boys that no one else could accommodate. He started there in September, and we didn't get to see him for over 5 months. That was a long time. His progress was scarce, but he worked hard at working off consequences. His relations with his peers were still far from smooth and seemed to be the catalyst to so many of his problems. We went out as a family every 3 months or so for workshops. We even took our daughter to one. After a day of family team building exercises, she sat through a 2-day family Arbinger workshop in Idaho among 40 middle school troubled boys and their desperate parents, that included us. The workshop was entitled, "How Can Our Relationships with Others, Even the Difficult Ones, Be Improved?" You can imagine how much she enjoyed that. But she was a trooper and didn't complain too much. Anyway, after a year of struggling in this environment, my son was eventually kicked out. He basically self-sabotaged himself as he could see no other way out. At that time, no one understood this apart from him. We were given 2 days to find a new placement for him, and we were told that it would be best if we didn't see him. So we hired an escort to pick him up and take him to his new placement. 2 days later, he was taken away by a man he'd never met before. He and a man who he'd never met before took a plane to Salt Lake City, where he was then met at the bottom of the escalators by some staff who he'd never met before from a different Wilderness program. So back to Wilderness he went. It was there that after he'd been there for about 2 weeks, that his therapist told us about the theory of mind and how our son was rigid and not oppositional, and things started falling into place. As it turns out, my son does not have bipolar disorder, but he lacks a theory of mind. Now this is when you don't understand that other people can have different views and beliefs to your own. Theory of mind is a social language. It's a social language that we all learn when we're about 2 years old. But somehow, my son missed learning it. Instead, I have a son who truly believes that everyone does and should think in the same way that he does. If he finds a joke funny, then everyone else should find a joke funny. And if anyone is to believe something different to him than what he thinks, he sees it as an immediate personal rejection, and a terribly unfair one at that. The Wilderness program immediately did more depth neuropsychological testing on him and found that although he doesn't test for autistic syndrome disorder, or indeed present himself as a child with this illness, when he is deregulated, which is often, he possesses many symptoms of a child with autism. This was the latest turning point for him and us as a family. Finally, we understood where his issues seemed to stem from, at least for now. After 10 weeks, he was ready to leave his second Wilderness program, and he moved on to a school in Utah, which is a high school, and I quote, "designed for males with academic or social struggles due to learning differences. These social or learning disabilities are most commonly labelled as autism spectrum disorder, nonverbal learning disorder, Asperger's syndrome, attention disorders, anxiety disorders, pervasive development disorders, and social pragmatic disorders." Although my son keeps proclaiming that he is not autistic, right now this school is exactly where he needs to be. Today he is stable, he has his daily ups and downs, but he's on the right trajectory. He still struggles greatly in knowing how to connect and relate with his peers in a healthy way, but he is motivated, and finally in a place where he is understood. Just last Thursday, we celebrated him reaching Circle 2 at his new school. And he's gained a few new privileges. These are 10 minutes personal cool-down time, requires therapist approval, and off-campus privileges. He can also now earn rewards to come home for a home visit. And most importantly of all, he can earn towards a home gaming device privileges. He has not had any access to any gaming or electronics for the last 23 months. So he's keen to finish the current programme and move back closer to home, but only when he is ready. And, in his words, he has learned everything he can. As parents, we feel that we now understand his issues, and what is more, we have a huge toolkit of coping skills to help him and us. However, we've also learned that we must live in the present. Today is today, and tomorrow, the nicely balanced equation may well become unbalanced, for no obvious reason. Today, he has been away from home for exactly 667 days, which equates to 1 year, 9 months, and 28 days. We have learned to celebrate the good days over the hard days. We no longer ask ourselves if he's going to get a job when he leaves college, or even if he will go to college, bearing in mind he's now a high school freshman. But we ask if he has managed to self-regulate himself. Has he managed to not antagonise a peer today, maybe this week? Looking any further ahead than a week is no longer relevant. So I just want to quickly show you these photos on here, so you can see who this boy is that I'm talking about. On the top left, that's his nursery school photo. The one here is the first day when he was admitted to his first wilderness camp. He was 13 years old, he weighed 185 pounds, he was obese, and not in a very good state. The one with the orange sweater is why he was at the wilderness camp. Times are tough while you're at a wilderness camp because they take away every barrier that you have to hide and cover up your emotions, and you have to deal with them. So I think this is him probably sitting and trying to deal with his emotions. This one here is a little bit further on at the same wilderness camp where he's much happier, he's lost a lot of weight, and he's happy to go off hiking for the day and drink muddy pond water. This next one with the horse is, I have actually some friends here who have had children at this same school, so they'll know this. This is from Idaho. It is equine assisted psychotherapy. Thank you. And this photo here is the second wilderness, where we went to pick him up at the airport on his way back. And finally, this photo is from Christmas of just last year. Okay, we're on the home run now. Oh my God. So, just to put things into perspective, this slide illustrates, well, it shows all of the lists of every diagnosis that my son has had in his life and every medication that he's been on. And I'm sure this list will evolve further. It's very important to remember that medication is just the oil that helps the machine run smoothly. It's never going to fix a problem completely, but it can help. And equally, medications don't work immediately. They have to be titrated up or down. They react differently on every single child. And it takes a long time to reach the therapeutic dose for each individual. And for teenagers, some of the effects of medication can be negated or drastically changed if they're mixed with other substances, for example, smoking pot. Getting a diagnosis is the most important thing you will do because ultimately it'll give you power. It's also going to be challenging. There's no current consensus in the medical world about what behaviours constitute a particular disorder, which means that one doctor could diagnose a child with ADHD, another doctor could diagnose exactly the same child with oppositional defiance disorder, and then a third doctor might diagnose that child with bipolar disorder. Also remember that children grow and develop at different rates, so sometimes if your child is behind, it doesn't necessarily mean they have a disorder. They might just need some social skills help or some speech therapy or something just to catch up to the class. Now the DSM, which is the holy grail of mental disorders, it's the Bible, It's interesting because it's based on subjective opinion rather than objective research, which really baffles my mind. But what is considered normal and what is considered a mental disorder depends on the current attitudes of society and not on scientific evidence. So this just reinforces how subjective and therefore complicated the whole area of mental health is. In many cases, a diagnosis will be fluid and it'll change with age, with support, with hormones, or just with a brand new day. And some symptoms will often mask others. And having a child who gets good grades and doesn't disturb the classroom can often work against you. So, how do we do this? What I've learned as a parent is that at the end of the day, the most important thing is you have to trust your gut and ask questions. Don't assume that professionals know everything. And if any professional ever tells you that they know your child better than you do, then that should be a very big red flag. For a long time, I wasn't good at asking questions because I didn't feel educated enough. And I believed that the experts were the experts. So I just rolled along with whatever they said. But now I know that gut feeling as a parent is indispensable. Medication, again, is just the oil that helps the machine. It's not like taking an antibiotic for an infection. And remember, no child ever said, I would like to have a mental health illness, just as no parent ever said, I want to make a bad decision for my child. This slide shows some of the emotions that I have felt. I'm feeling very happy tonight, so that's good. But, and it's okay to feel these emotions, you will feel these emotions, but it's not okay if one or two of them start prevailing. Really, we have to try not to feel shameful. I know now that I'm not alone, and everybody in this room is not alone, we're all here. And I can't stress how important a support network is. My son was kicked out of his previous school last fall, but I still text weekly and often daily with a group of parents that I met there. Not only do we text when things are hard, but we also try to share our successes of our boys. These friends are a vital lifeline to me and a great source to validate my feelings. Another newsflash is that we're not perfect, and that also is really okay. Even though we manage everyday situations that a regular parent may think is impossible, we're not superheroes. I know, I'm sorry. And we won't always get it right. And often, many of the choices don't have the right answer, because often we have to choose the lesser of two evils. Idaho, Wisconsin. Our son spent a year in a boarding school, which ultimately wasn't the right fit for him. But at the time that we made that decision, we made the best decision we could with the information we had. He's now working at getting over the trauma of failing, but it was an unavoidable thing, and it's also part of our journey, and we've learned a huge amount from it. Self-care can help reduce many of these feelings, and working as a team is really, really important. During our first wilderness, my husband and I had to really work together each week, studying a parenting book, chapter by chapter, word for word. And even when we thought we were really working together, our different backgrounds and our different cultures, the different ways that we were brought up, meant that we weren't a completely seamless team. I owned the problem and was frightened of setting the barriers, and my husband set the barriers without owning the problem. Once we realised this, we were able to do something about it. Now we even speak the same emotional language at home that we all understand, and we try to ensure that we parent as a unit as often as we can. Now believe me, we're far from perfect, but at least we know what we should be doing, and we have the vocabulary and the tools to do it. So, you may well have seen this before. I think some people might be laughing because they might have already seen this slide. It's not meant to be that funny. So I'm going to use myself as an example. So I'm in the middle here, and it's so important to have circles of support around you. So the closest people who are around me are those who are kind, loving, and supportive. So these are my family, my very close friends, and there they are, aren't they lovely? So these are the people who you know are not going to judge you. These are the people who are going to sit with you through thick or thin, and you want them in that first support circle. In the next circle, you have those who are loving but inattentive and distant. Now, I would put my parents-in-law in that circle. I love them dearly, but not only are they geographically far away, distant, they live in France, but they're also emotionally distant. In the next circle, we're going to have those who are loving but prone to enthusiastically taking more than they ever can give back. I think we all probably know people like that. Now they need to stay in that third circle. Don't let them any nearer in. And finally, around the outside, we have arseholes who are not in my realm of influence. And there they are, the arseholes. Keep them outside of that circle of support. Okay, on to slightly more serious things. The limbic brain. Now, the limbic brain is something that I've become slightly obsessed with. And my clinician friends who are here tonight will know because they managed to get me to condense down from 6 slides to 1, which I'm sure you're very happy about. But I love the limbic brain, and the reason I love it is because it's helped me to understand that most mental health issues are neurological. Now, I love this because it takes away the blame of me as a parent. It's not my fault, it's neurological. So here we have the rational brain, and we have the limbic system, or the limbic brain, which is the emotional part. And down here, we have the limbic brain, the bits of it. And the amygdala is probably the bit that most of you will heard of. It's responsible for the fear, for all the reactions our body has to fear. And it's often reprimanded for hijacking the rational brain, which is up there. So the limbic brain is the oldest and the most primitive part of the brain. It was formed many hundreds of thousands of years ago. And it has one key role, and that's it. Its key role is to keep us safe. It works on automatic pilot. There's no thinking in the limbic brain. Any feelings and emotions that either motivate us or paralyze us all come from the limbic brain. And when it is hijacking, everything is emotional and not rational. Sometimes it's referred to as the tiger or the snake that hijacks the rational brain. With older children, it's often referred to as a way to self-regulate. And once our children can learn to regulate their limbic brain, then they can regulate their emotions. The good news, so I recently learned that my child has a non-neurotypical brain, which is wired differently to neurotypical brains. In a non-neurotypical brain, what happens is just as the neural pathways are growing, somewhere around the age of 2, a pruning happens, which means that some of the executive pathways get snipped and they get whittled down, just like you prune a shrub in your garden. The good news is that a rewiring can take place. These pruned neural pathways can grow again, but it takes a long time and it takes a lot of consistent practice in order to get them to grow again. This is another reason why we need early intervention, why it's so important, so that we have time to cement those pruned neuro pathways before the brain eventually stops maturing in our mid-20s or early 30s. We know that for an adult to regrow neuro pathways, it takes about 8 months of consistent practice. And that's 8 months when the brain is at an attentive, calm state, which means it's not limbic, it's completely rational. I've heard many therapists say, if you don't use it, you lose it. And I think this is illustrated by my next example. During the April break, I drove my daughter, who's now a junior, to visit some colleges. Now, considering my history of panic attacks, this for me was a huge step out of my comfort zone. But I was able to use my newfound coping skills to manage it. I still get the physical warnings, and I still get those feelings of feeling trapped and not being able to escape. But now I know it's because my automatic limbic brain is trying to take over. It's trying to keep me safe. It's trying to do its job. So these automatic symptoms start. But if I can believe that I can override these feelings and convince my limbic brain that in fact I am safe, and actually I am okay stuck in that traffic jam, well then my limbic brain will be overrode by the rational brain, and the neuro pathways will become stronger, and the limbic pathways will become weaker. And if I practice this a lot, well then eventually the pathways will be retrained, just like in that plant. So I know now that if I can ride if I can ride the waves of uneasy feelings, if I can sit with them, they'll eventually become less uneasy. And every time I do that, I'm reinforcing my neuro pathways. So eventually it'll become a learned behaviour. And this is exactly the same with our children. My son has learnt that deep breathing really helps him to stop a limbic brain hijack. Now, when his rational brain is hijacked, he can't listen to redirection and he can't redirect himself. Bear in mind also that for our children who are non-neurotypical, the hijacking of the limbic brain can happen in such a split second they don't even know it's happening. So they need to be very aware of the triggers that set off their limbic brain as well, so that they can eventually learn to override those too. So for example, my son, he knows that the triggers are his perceived rejections from peers. So once he's got his head around that, then he can eventually stop the limbic brain from overriding his rational brain, and the more he does it, then he can grow those neuro pathways, and eventually, hey presto, in a few years' time, in many years, it might become a learned behaviour. So, I play tennis. I tell my husband it's part of my self-care program. And I know when my pro gives me a rule, it really helps me. I like rules. The last rule I learned was that if I have my feet inside the baseline, and I think I can win the point, then I can whack that ball and try and win the point. But if my feet are behind the baseline or outside of the baseline, I probably can't win a point from there, so I should probably just send the ball back as deeply as I can. Now, this is a simple rule, but I like it because it gives me something to focus on, and it gives me a map to follow. It makes me feel like I'm making progress. So I've tried to get some rules together for you tonight, some rules that I found helpful. So your child's behaviour is not personal. We all know this. But really and truly, your child does not want to ruin your day. Your child really truly does not hate you. I would bet that they're feeling frustrated and overwhelmed and maybe don't have the emotional maturity or the emotional vocabulary to verbalise it. It's about the process and not the content. It's why something happened as opposed to what exactly happened. So for example, if my son is poking a classmate with a pencil on the carpet, like he's done many, many times before, it's actually not about him poking the pencil, but it's about why he's poking that pencil. Has he lost focus on the lesson? Does he not understand the lesson? Or is he bored because he already knows the lesson? Equally, if your child tells you to F off, it's the same thing. Why are they saying that? Are they upset with themselves? Or are they upset with something that happened at school? Or are they mad at themselves? Whatever it is, it's important to let them sit with their emotions, as each time they do, they're learning to re-cement those neural pathways. Vocabulary also is very important. The I feel statements that we all know about, but also reflective listening. Now, this does sound a bit textbook and a bit dorky when you say it, but it really does work. And the more you say it, the more creative you can become at saying it, and the less textbook it'll sound. So for example, let's just say one of your children comes in and says, I'm going to hit Jimmy tomorrow because he was teasing me about his hair. You're going to listen and mirror. So you can say, what I am hearing is that you're hurt today because you were being made fun of by a friend. Then you're going to validate and empathise. You can say, what a terrible end to your school day. It sounds like you've been teased by someone who you thought was your friend. Then you want to move the problem solving right back onto them. So what did you do about it? What do you think you can do to help the situation? And in this case, we have to set a boundary by saying, hitting is not acceptable. But if you'd like to go and talk to your teacher about it in the morning, that would be a good thing to do. What we must not do in this case is rescue our child. Do not say, darling, I'll buy you some new shampoo and everything will be fine. And do not say, let me speak to Jimmy's mother immediately and I'll sort it all out for you. Your child needs to learn to self-advocate, and if we rescue them, they won't be able to. Boundaries. All children, especially teenagers, although they pretend they hate boundaries, they need boundaries. They need boundaries to feel safe. Now, I grew up on a farm in the south of England. This is a true story. We had cows, among other animals, and when our cows had finished eating the grass of one field, we'd move them into a new field with lots of lush new grass in it. Every time we moved them into a new field, they would make a predetermined lap of the perimeter fence of the field before they would go and fast on the nice green lush grass in the middle. Now, this is because they have to feel safe. They have to check that there's no holes in their boundaries before they can eat the grass. Now, children are exactly the same. Boundaries are necessary to keep them feeling safe. This has been one of my hardest challenges as a parent, to keep firm boundaries. I'm a people pleaser. I don't like putting boundaries down, but I'm really working at it. And when I'm against a child like my own, who is a very creative boundary pusher and a very persistent one, I find it especially hard. So now we've established that I really do like rules. I do also like breaking rules, but that might be for another day. But one more rule I like is the praise to criticism ratio. And I just like to try and remember this in the back of my mind, because I know so many times I've been at fault doing this. So one criticism has 5 times the amount of negative effect as one praise does positive effect. So for example, if you criticize your partner, your child, your sister, remember that you'll then need to praise them at least 5 times to make up for the effect that that criticism has had. And I know this is especially difficult if your child suffers from ADHD and is driving you crazy. Criticizing them is really hard to not do, but it's really important to remember the effect that the criticism has. So, science. I love science. Because we can say that my teenager isn't ADHD and depressed. In fact, my teenager is twice exceptional and non-neurotypical. That sounds so much better. There are millions of books about behaviour modification plans and tools that will help us become better parents. And I have 2 favourites. One of them is a fabulous emotional literacy tool, which is developed by Yale University. It's a quadrant where children and adults can plot their current emotions, and they can then plot where they would like to be, and they can see how to get from where they are to where they'd like to be. I don't have time to talk about this now, but I have lots of information on it for anybody that wants it. You 2 know it already. And another good behaviour management plan is the Positive Parenting Plan, which is the fastest growing behaviour modification plan in America. It's where you have family rules, all of the family becomes invested, and you replace unwanted behaviours by wanted behaviours. And it's very good, especially for younger children, because it provides a lot of consistency and it also takes the emotions out of parenting. And again, I have lots of information on this if anyone's interested. Something else that I really wish I'd learned previously to about 4 months ago was the difference between oppositional children and rigid children. Up until then, for me, they'd always just been put in the same basket. But what I learned is that oppositional children have a cognitive behaviour. So it's something that you can change by behaviour modification. Whereas rigid children, it's a neurological inability. Now this can still be changed by growing those neuro pathways and practicing and practicing and practicing, but it's just going to take a little bit longer. Rigid thinking. This all ties back to the theory of mind, which is the whole theory about the fact that other people can have different views and different beliefs to you have. And as I said before, it's a language that all of us have or haven't learned around the age of 2. And if we haven't learnt it, we have to learn it through our life, because it's very important for all the social, for recognizing social language. And my son is having to learn this new language now. A bit like any of us learning Chinese, he's having to learn it. And I actually have a little YouTube clip which very nicely explains the theory of mind much better than I could do it.
Beginning about 15 years ago, there's one property of human intelligence that scientists got very interested in, and it's called having a theory of mind. And the best way to describe it is to describe a classic experiment with human children. So imagine you're sitting around and you're telling stories with your younger sister. And you tell them the story, you say, well, here's Sally. And Sally has a ball that she really likes, and she's going to put it in the basket, which is right there in front of her. And she hides the ball in the basket. And here's Anne, Sally's friend, and they're playing together. And Sally then says, I've got to go to the bathroom, so I'm going to leave the room. And when she leaves the room, Anne takes the ball out of the basket and puts it in a box, a green box that she's got next to her. Now Sally comes back into the room and she wants to play with the ball. And supposing you asked your sister, where is Sally going to look for the ball? If your sister is 3 years old, she'll say, in the box, because she knows that's where the ball is. And a 3-year-old has knowledge, of course, but can't imagine that other people have knowledge that's different from her own. So if she knows the ball's in the box, everybody knows the ball's in the box. And that's because a 3-year-old doesn't do what scientists call attributing mental states to other people. She doesn't think that other people have thoughts, desires, beliefs, knowledge. So she answers the question incorrectly. As children get older, it happens pretty quickly, 4 or 5 or so. They go through the same test, and you ask them the same question, and they begin to say, well, Sally's going to look for the ball in the basket, because that's where she thinks it is. And a 5 or 6-year-old will say, she'll look for the ball in the basket because she thinks incorrectly that the ball is still in the basket. But I know it's been moved into the box. So by 6, children have the ability to attribute mental states to others. They have what we call a theory of mind. And we call it a theory because there's nothing about the other person that shows that they're thinking. Thoughts are hidden. We don't see them. The only way we can imagine that thoughts are there and that they cause behavior is if we have a theory about the way the world works. People have thoughts, and the thoughts cause them what to do. And of course, humans, our theory of mind just pervades all of our life. We're forever making a distinction between what people do and what they think we do. I mean, think about your relationships with other people. Yeah, she was nice to me yesterday, but does she really like me? Or, I think that he doesn't know that you really do like him. These things can get incredibly baroque, where you're attributing theory of mind back and forth to 3 other people. It's what we do in plays, it's what we do in our daily life all the time. But it's not something we're born with. You've got to learn it.
Okay, we really are on the home straight now. So, how does all of this apply to you? My advice would be, at home, just focus on the symptoms. Don't worry about the diagnoses. You've got to manage the symptoms on a day-to-day basis, and that's going to what's going to get you through. You need to build a support group, and you need to get help. But don't, as I say, don't focus on the diagnosis. Whereas at school, you need to focus on the diagnosis because it's going to give you power. It's going to liberate you. It's not like handcuffs, believe me. Every district is different, but it's law that the school provide accommodation for your child if they need it. And if you have doubts about whether your child needs accommodations or not, then you can speak to the teacher. There's all sorts of advocates who can help you if you're not sure whether they do or they don't. Just be wary that school assessments take a long time. Your child will be pulled out of the classroom on many occasions. And if you do decide to do a private assessment, then it's going to be expensive. How can I help you? Well, I'm here really to act as a parent sounding board for you and your family. I can help with individualised behaviour modification plans, and I can offer guidance on educational issues. I can offer an empathetic ear and some sound advice, maybe over a glass of wine. But most importantly, I can offer a no judgment, neutral and confidential forum from another parent who really does understand. So as Lisa said in the beginning, we've been on this therapeutic journey for quite a long time now. And I feel like we've picked up a fair amount of competencies. We might not be able to use them all correctly every single time, but at least we know what we should be doing, and we have a huge toolbox full of things. Some of the interesting workshops that I've been on, there's Meta Moments up in the top there, which is all about controlling our emotions before they control us. And that all can link back to the limbic brain, it can link back to mindfulness and self-care. So that's a really interesting one. The Hero's Journey, which I have a friend here, Miriam, knows an awful lot about it. It's all about being willing to let go of the life we planned, so as to have the life that's waiting for us. And sometimes that's what we need to do. When you're told that your child is on the spectrum or has all the symptoms of a child on the spectrum, that's a pretty big bombshell. And I have an excellent presentation which is really useful. It goes through all things related, the deficits, the dysfunctions, how it's undiagnosed, how it's misdiagnosed, the profiles, the strengths of ASD students, how to make it go right, what you can do at home to help. It's not easy. And what else have we got here? The parent's emotional journey is how to help parents to deal with fear and guilt and worry and frustration and sadness and overwhelm and all those wonderful things that come with having a child who's challenging. And I think we'll go to the next slide. So this is a slide of my top 10 reading recommendations. Now this sheet is also, I've printed it out so you don't have to write it all down, but please take one from the back before you go. Our binge of books, the top two, are books which are in a story format. They're very easy to read, and they're basically about overcoming conflict, whether it be in your family life, your work life, or your social life. But I would really recommend reading them to everybody, and I know my husband has even persuaded all of his team at work to read them. The next author down, I have 3 of his books written on this slide. It's Daniel Siegel. Now, I'm really obsessed with him because he's a super smart man. He's a child psychiatrist, and he's currently a clinical professor of psychiatry at UCLA School of Medicine. And I particularly like his books because they're backed by the brain science. And they give us novel ways to make changes to our brains, which in turn can make changes to the symptoms we have, and then ultimately to how we live our everyday lives. I think I have a range of books that I put at the back. Please feel free to have a look at them. There's about 5 or 6 from written by Daniel Siegel there. This little Serenity Prayer, again, I've got a few friends in the audience who know this. I'm not really very religious, But I do like what it says about to accept the things I cannot change, have courage to know the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. I think it's quite a nice little thing to know. And then there's tons of resources online. You can type, what do I do with a child with ADHD, and you'll get pages and pages and pages of advice. Here there's just a few of the main websites for mental health that might be interesting for you. So, see, we really are at the end, nearly. As Lisa mentioned, you'll receive a SurveyMonkey email tomorrow. As I said, I'm not sure where tonight's going to lead. I have a gut feeling it's going to lead to bigger and better things, but who knows. I would just really like to thank you all for coming. And I have a lot more information I'd like to share, obviously, from a parent's perspective, but I'd be honoured to help in any way that I can, not just as a fellow parent, but more importantly, as somebody who really does get it. Thank you very much.